The sun is up, the day is wide open, and life still has so much to give. Every laugh, every step, every shared moment says the story is still unfolding beautifully. You are not finished yet. Your story continues.
Most people think life follows a straight line. Education, career, retirement. But for many, that line changes. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, and sometimes by a moment they never expected. This is Not Finished Yet, a podcast about people who started again and discovered their most interesting chapter was still ahead. Each episode shares real stories of reinvention, the risks, the decisions, and what it actually takes to build something new later in life. Because the truth is, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. Can I just add that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of any organisations, employers or partners connected to them. Before we start, a quick note. A large number of people who listen to the podcast haven't yet subscribed. If you find these conversations valuable, hit subscribe or follow on your platform. It makes a huge difference and helps us keep sharing these stories. Now, let's get into this week's story.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Chris, to You're Not Finished Yet. So here we go. Anything we say, Chris, we can cut out or anything else like that. So it's quite casual. So I'll just change and trim the first bit, and I'll obviously let you know when we're all done. So most people don't burn out because they fail. They burn out because they succeed at the wrong things. Today's guest is Chris Woods. Knows exactly what that looks like. Chris is a certified professional coach, a former Google sales leader, and a 4-time global C-suite executive who has spent decades operating at the highest level of business. From the outside, his life looked like a definition of success. At 40 years old, everything changed when Chris flatlined in a hospital bed. That moment forced him to confront a question many of us avoid. What if life you've built isn't exactly the life you want? Now Chris is an author of Balls and Brains. Want to hear about that? A powerful framework designed to help people overcome fear and maximise their strengths and ultimately build lives that feel good as they look. This conversation is about fear, identity, success, and what happens when you stop playing small. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here.
Lovely. Well, I'm just going to get it straight in. Growing up in Boston, from the UK, watching so many films, that sounds like a tough place. What did that environment teach you early on?
Yeah, so I grew up there in the 70s and 80s, and it was definitely rough and tumble. And I used to have a very thick Boston accent, but in my professional career, I've worked to kind of hide it a bit. But it comes out when I get tired, I ham it, is how I tell people from Boston. So that means if I get tired or I get drunk. Yeah. So it was definitely a tough upbringing, but I was always pretty smart in school. So used that to do well and kind of escape from what things that a lot of people do there. But I think it set me up for success, that I was able to go on to professional success, that I had that maybe edge to me.
Excellent. So you described it as a original Good Will Hunting, which is one of my favourite films, by the way. I'm sure many others as well. What does that mean in reality?
Yeah, so my dad died when I was 2, and then my mom remarried to kind of an abusive alcoholic. So I had a lot of the parallels that the character had, but I was always wicked smart, as they said, and I hung around with a very tough and rough crowd, just the same way that that character did. So that definitely hit the spot for me. Seeing that movie, it felt definitely a bit, autobiographical. So I definitely give that a lot of credit for where I've come. So it'll always hold a special place in my heart.
Yeah, so I wanted to dive into that a little bit. Where did you think that drive came from? Was that the environment, the people that you're with, those hardcore kind of Boston boys, or was it something else?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it was from that, as well as I was very driven that I wanted to succeed. And I knew I wasn't going to be a pro athlete, and I wasn't, the toughest of the guys. But I knew that I was blessed with some intelligence and with some ambition. So I used that as a drive. And then frankly, I kind of felt pissed off that I was born into a bit of disadvantage, what happened, with my dad and then subsequent stuff. So I used that as a chip on my shoulder and was like, you know what? I'm gonna show you, and whoever you was, it was more just I'm gonna show you, and I'm going to, overcome any kind of disadvantage I had, and just watch,
So do you think then that you were chasing something or running from something?
So as it turns out, I think I was chasing something. So, you mentioned, and kind of the big takeaway on it is I flatlined in the hospital at 40. And that's the same age my dad was when he died. So it was strange. I had a bit of a knowing that I was going to go early. So I was always saying that I was living for not as much of a resume as I was living for an obituary. And so I wanted to succeed and be able to have people say about me after I had gone, wow, look at all that he accomplished, despite the fact that he was, born into that disadvantage. So I was running towards it. I was running towards a deadline. And I think it served me in a lot of ways, but then once I was given a second chance after the flat line, it gave me a chance to take a look at it in a different way.
So those early signs of balls and brains, as you put it, did you recognise the fear or strengths back then?
So I definitely recognized the fear, but I wouldn't talk to anybody about it, right? It was not one of those things that you would share, and I wouldn't talk to my mom about it, and you didn't do therapy back then. It was more just, as you would say it back then, you just suck it up. And so I was running on fear, but had to just keep it internal to myself. And it's only after, reflection to be able to see back on it, it was like, oh, that was what that was. And, give yourself some grace that you did the best that you could with it. But once you can apply some maturity and perspective to it, there's a healthier way to approach.
Okay, so look, looking back in what did success at that point in your life in your 20s mean to you?
So in the 20s was to go into a professional career and continue to ascend. And I also wanted to do things that I felt not a lot of other people growing up around me did. So, there were kind of professional job paths, but I wanted mine to be a bit different. So I used my undergrad degree in finance, and I went into the entertainment business, and I worked for originally an Australian-based chain of movie theaters, and then I did another movie theater chain that was actually the parent company of Viacom, which owned Paramount Pictures, and then eventually moved to New York City and worked for Sony in their movie theater division. So I did, while I was doing that, I got into an MBA program, and Sony paid for it. So I had some, great experience, and I'm very grateful for everything that they did. And then once I earned the MBA, I got an opportunity to build a cinema advertising business that had come over from the UK, where you are, Mark. And just at the right time to be able to build that. And then from there, Google saw what I was doing and recruited me.
So you climb into the top in Google. What did life actually look like at that level? Day-to-day pressure. Explain that to everybody.
Yeah, so it was great to originally get there, and I got there in '06, and it was just starting to kind of scale. And then between '06 and 13 is when it really scaled, right? It got a lot bigger. They bought YouTube, and then just started getting more massive. So as I got promoted in there was a lot more structure and a lot more expectation, as opposed to more of the entrepreneurial type environment it was when we first got in there. You could try new things and do a lot. So, there's still a lot of success in there, but they would always say the higher you went in there was more heat and light on the picture, right? So that you got the exposure, but there was a lot of pressure involved in it to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, this next bit I want to try and touch on a bit of leadership there. I mean, I own my own businesses over the years, and now I run a peelables coating company that we ship to the US and all over the world. And leadership is often misunderstood, with the amount of people that work with. So what do people misunderstand about senior leadership roles, in your opinion?
I think everyone's expected to be the same, and again, it's understandable when you have a big organization and you need to keep it, scaled and structured. Whereas I think you lose a bit of the individuality that you have of people to be able to play to their talents once something gets big and structured. So when I got there in '06, it was still small enough that people who showed an ability in a certain area got a chance to, to do more of that. So I definitely saw that and completely understand that that's how companies need to be run. But that actually got me, as part of the things that I've written in the book on balls and brains. The brains part of it is to understand what you're really good at and go all in. And if you end up finding yourself in a job where, what you're really good at is not what's valued, and you end up playing more of defense on your weaknesses than you are playing offense on your strengths, it's something to take a look at.
It's a good way of putting it, basically. Yeah. So, I mean, you said already in your early stages, you feel that success was where you ended up there. It was what you'd strived for. But when was that moment you realised this isn't what I thought it would be?
So it's a pretty big moment. So I flatlined in the hospital at 40 years old. It ended up happening. I was bitten by a tick and ended up with cardiac Lyme disease. But when I was in there, I flatlined. I came back. They called a thing called Code Blue. I come back and come back too, and the room is surrounded by all these doctors. And they're like, "Mr. Woods, we're going to keep you in here until we figure out what's going on." So long story short, they ended up getting through it. They installed a pacemaker in my chest. The Maserati of pacemakers, as they gave me, because I was working for Google at the time, and they said, "You have the best health insurance in the world. We're going to give you the best device in the world." I said, "Okay, thanks." So they then said, "You've got another 50 years to live, assuming this all thing works." And that's what I ended up thinking is like, okay, so if I have this other 50 years, which I wasn't really expecting, how do I want to do it, and what do I want to do differently? So that's what started the process. It wasn't just kind of like overnight epiphany, but it was more just like I can now maybe operate less from deadline and fear driven to take a more thoughtful approach now that I've been blessed with some more time.
So that was the catalyst. That was the trigger point. But was you thinking before then, that things weren't just what they should be, or was you already thinking that this isn't where I fit?
Yeah, I already was, and for the reasons that I was saying, is as that company was evolving more towards, large and more scaled, I definitely had a feeling like this wasn't going to be for me long term, what it would take to stay there. So I would envision moving on to a smaller size company where I could have more impact, the way that you had at Google earlier. So it was already in my thought process. So I ended up doing that 3 years later. It was kind of the slow hunch, as they call it. Yeah. And that's what I ended up doing.
So you mentioned before about, playing, you put it quite well, if you're always playing defense rather than offense, so, where at that time, do you think you were operating from a position of strength or constantly covering weaknesses?
I think it was a combination, but it was more trending towards a scenario where I was playing defense on my weaknesses. Because frankly, for me, as it continued to scale, they expected, even from a sales standpoint, for people to have sharp analytical skills and have a lot of left brain. And I'm frankly more of a right brain person. Yeah. So as much as I would kind of labor to keep up, and I would do okay, but I'm also then kind of quote unquote competing with the best and brightest in the world, that comes easier to them. So I sensed it coming, that way, but it wasn't like an immediate part of it. It was kind of like a trend.
So how much of that success was driven by fear then, your then success?
I'd say 90% of it. That it was just about every day thinking, oh boy, is today the day where the jig is up, or am I going to be exposed here that I'm not as good as it seems like I am? So and that's not necessarily an organization where people just get fired and you get your head chopped off. It was more just me thinking like, wow, I've been running on adrenaline and smarts for these 40 years or so. Is it when's the day that my luck runs out?
So, I mean, see, this question is probably easy to answer for you, but you've obviously working at level. Before we move on, you've obviously worked with a lot of high-end C-suite kind of players. So, why do so many high performers feel stuck then, even when they've so-called made it, let's call it. Why do you think that is?
I believe it's they realize they're not able to be their authentic selves, that they have to play a role in a lot of ways. Um, there's a lot of pressure, and even if you are, the CEO of a company, obviously there's pressure on them. It's not like, when you get there, there isn't. And so there's always pressure from a boss or pressure from, a board of directors. And I also think the nature of business, most businesses, particularly big businesses, is it's always like, what have you done for me lately, right? So it's always about next quarter. And yeah, that was great that you guys had a great Q1, but you better beat the number in Q2. So I think that ends up becoming kind of a constant stress level for people. And if they're doing it just for the paycheck, and then once they've actually done well, it becomes more of a fear of loss, right? Like, oh boy, what if I ever lose this? Or what if I, am perceived to not be as good as I was? It ends up becoming a fear of loss as opposed to a passion for gain.
Okay, so I want to get on to an important part that you talk about, the flat line moment, let's call it, you know. So I want to go back to that moment just for a minute. What goes through your mind when your life literally stops? Is it fear, clarity, regret? Talk us through that. Tell us what happened and talk us through the whole process of that.
So when it was happening, it was definitely fear. And then after, as I was like coming back to consciousness, it was strange because I could hear everything that was happening in the room, but I wasn't able to talk. I wasn't able to articulate it to them. So I could tell I was coming back, and I wanted to tell them, I'm like, guys, I'm coming back, but I couldn't speak. So once I finally got my senses back to me, and they let me know, what had gone on, but then kind of assured me, they're like, all right, we're going to figure out, what the deal is here. It was still just very much adrenaline. I would say that it was still fear and disbelief for a while until they were like, okay, so you're stabilized now. We're going to treat this cardiac Lyme disease, and we're going to get you probably a device in you to safeguard against anything like this ever happening again. So it went from then fear to a relief and optimism.
So what you've gone through this, you've been given kind of the all clear, like a second chance in a way. I don't know, you might put it something different, but so what was the first realization you had after that then? What was
that I was going to be able to stick around longer for my kids. So I have two daughters, and now they're 25 and 21. So that was 16 years ago when this happened. So they were a lot younger. So that was the biggest thing. Is like, wow, I'm going to be around here for a while, and I want to make sure that I prioritize this role. This is my purpose here, to be a dad. And then the other part of it is like, wow, if I have this time, instead of running on fear for an obituary and not just blowing up my life and deciding to, I don't know, go join the ministry, I was like, what else can I do to be more authentic to myself in all aspects of my life?
So it's given you a real kind of change in priorities, absolutely, which it would probably do,
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. So let's get on to the balls and brains framework. So you've gone all through this, you've realised there was more to life, and you've probably poured on your experiences of what you can do next. So break down the concept. Why balls and brains? Let's go into that first.
So first and foremost, the name is meant to be an attention grabber in this day and age of short attention spans. If everyone's always looking back, like, oh, all right, so what's balls and brains means? I'll give you 10 seconds to tell me. So the balls part of it is to be able to gain an awareness around what you're afraid of, right? So there's a quote that says that, the fears we don't face become our limits. My audience, though I work with both men and women, the book is meant to be mostly for men as an accessible way for them to have this kind of conversation. So it's the first thing is getting an awareness around your fears that are holding you back. And then the brains part about it is not like being smart in school or anything like that. It's about having an awareness around what you're really good at. And are you leaning all in on that? Because oftentimes what I'll find, I'll have people take this Clifton Strength Finders, and it'll come back with their top 5 and their top 10. And if we map it against what they're currently doing, it's a very small percentage in a lot of times. And that ends up becoming part of what causes them stress, as well as limits their ability to be a top performer. So how do we get you more set up that you're doing more of the things that you're really good at, and not just necessarily having you leave your job or blow it up, but can we evolve your role in things that you're doing so you can be feeling more energized, that you're playing to your strengths as opposed to playing defense on the weaknesses?
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of the interviews we've done on here is around people reinventing themselves in a different career. But sometimes you just need to take the next step in your current career. So I'm glad you've covered that off, and so the book and the framework can be adapted for both sides of the fence, if you like, something new or something existing to create a better outcome.
Exactly.
But so when you mention about reevaluating those fears, what are the most common fears that hold people back then?
Well, it's interesting. I see it a lot that it's the fear of failure. It's the fear of disappointing others, whether it's parents or a spouse or family or friends. It's a fear of being exposed and not being as good as you like to present to the world. And so much of it ends up, when I have conversations with people, being the same thing that I have, right? And I just kept it to myself. And oftentimes men, at least in, a lot of the ones that I've worked with, aren't necessarily brought up to share that, right? It's meant to be just, buck up. It's not supposed to be easy, and nobody wants to hear you complain. Just do it. And so it's really meant to be, listen, I've been there. You can see I've actually been successful, and I'm not some, therapist that you might want to feel uncomfortable with. I'm just, I'm a regular guy who's found his way through this too, and you're not alone. So it ends up becoming that part of it. It'd be like, all right, what's the stuff that holds you back? I use a question from a guy, Peter Crone, another British guy who I really admire. And he asked the question, who would you be in the absence of your concerns? If you've heard this. And I love that, because it doesn't ask you what your concerns are, what your fears are, but I'm like, imagine the person you'd be. Who would you be? What would your day look like? What would your week look like? And it ends up opening, a pathway in people's brains. They're like, oh, I would do this, I would do this, I would feel this much better. And that becomes a bit of a North Star. You're like, okay, see, that is actually something you can do. So that's the first thing we do. We do end up then doing the strengths part of it. And those are the first 2 of a 5-step program. Quickly, the other ones are, then we reset their goals. Now that we've got a fresh view on, what you were afraid of and what you were playing small against, what you're really good at and what you could be doing more of, let's reset your goals, leaning into those things. And then it comes down to mindset, and then lastly about habits.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to go into the 5-step framework in a second, but I just want a couple of questions before we get into that. Why do you think people focus so much on fixing the weakness?
I think it's because oftentimes you're indoctrinated into that in school. That the things that you're not that good at, they tell you to do the homework on. They tell you to do all of that. And then oftentimes people will get jobs that they want it for the paycheck, they want it for the power, or the people to admire them, but they shoehorn themselves in, and this is the job you need to do, and some parts you're good at and other parts you're not, and you're just like, well, I need to do better at this. And then still you're in an organization, you get compared against other people who are more maybe naturally better at the stuff that you're not. So it ends up feeding this thing about feeling that you have to play catch up. And frankly, it's the thing that they talk about all the time about growth mindset. Everyone's like, growth mindset, you got to be, have an open mind, that you got to work on the things that you're not good at. And I just take a little bit of a different approach on that. I'm like, I like the idea of growth mindset, that you can get better, but what if you apply that growth mindset 80% against the things you're already good at and go from good to great, as opposed to putting that growth mindset on stuff that you're just not that good at. And maybe you're going to get to average, but being average when you can be better is a lot better way to live.
You explained it really well because, you know, you've mentioned it about playing offense with your strengths, you know, I I think we're always brought up. I think a lot of management books and studies are out there that says, yeah, you've got to get better at this, you've got to get better at that, and to be an entrepreneur, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. But not many people turn around and say you've got to play to your strengths. So what does that look like to you?
So the example I give, it kind of crystallizes it for people. One of the examples I give in the book is related to sports and Michael Jordan, the NBA player, right? Widely considered by a lot of people to be the best basketball player of all time. And so if you look at Jordan, his work ethic, what he was committed to work on, it was a 10 out of 10, right? Didn't slack off. He was 10 out of 10. No one worked harder than he did. And when he applied that against basketball, which he had a talent for, he was a 10 out of a 10 in talent, right? So his 10 times 10 was 100. Michael Jordan was 100 in basketball, right? Took time off, played baseball. Had played it in high school, played it in college. Still a great athlete, but wanted to do it, right? Went in and took those 2 years off, applied his same 10 out of 10 work ethic to it, but he never got out of the minor leagues, right? He was always going to be a 5 in that. So 10 times 5 was 50. He was going to max out at 50. And the great part about his story is, for whatever reason, he ended up switching after a couple of years and going back to basketball, right? And it was a perfect juxtaposition because he never stopped working, his tail off, but he was applying it against the things where he was the Michael Jordan of basketball. He's not the Michael Jordan of baseball. Yeah. So I leave that as an example. And another one I put in the book, and it's also a sports one, but it's related to a movie. So there's a movie from the 90s that's big in the States called Rudy. And it's about a guy who played football for the University of Notre Dame. And he would just worked his butt off. He was like an assistant, and finally got in on one play at the end of his senior year. And he made a good play, and he tackled the quarterback, and everyone's like, wow, what a great deal. And I remember hearing somebody say, you could argue that that's not a success story. You could say that's actually a failure story, because if he had put that same effort that he did against something that he was really good at, imagine what he could have been, as opposed to pouring all that effort into something that he wasn't that good at, and the greatest crowning achievement is he got on one play at the end of the game, at the end of his career, that didn't mean anything. So I like the idea of empowering people that to put your effort against things that you're good at, go from good to great, and it feels a lot better when you can actually see that you're good at something, as opposed to grinding.
Yeah, and I like the style, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a basketball expert, but I have watched a documentary on Michael Jordan, and I love sport, and I've come from a sport background myself, so it means a lot to me. But I remember that he was obviously a multi-talented individual, but quite a maverick in the way that the Bulls didn't win much at all when he was just on his own. It was when he was kind of put into a position and kind of honed to be brilliant at that one position, and put extra people around, other A-class players around him, that they had that success, if I was correct. And that says something about just not focusing. I don't know what you feel, but when you're focusing on what you're really good at, but you need that control and as well, don't you? You need that discipline in a way to make sure that you're channeling your excellence into the final goal, which is ultimately to win.
For sure, and that's the only way to win, but that's also a great way to spend your days, right? That if you've got some structure and discipline and mindset and habits around things, that's how you not just organically get better, but you can actually take advantage of it. And think about how much progress you can make over the course of years, staying focused on the things that you're really good at, that when other people are putting in probably less effort against those things, you're multiplying your talents times your effort. You've got a long way ahead of you to be a winner.
So to get that into some kind of context, you've got your 5-step framework. Let's talk us through those 5 steps.
Yeah.
And also let me know on the way, if you want, where do most people get stuck in that process.
Yeah. So I normally the book starts with the fears part of it, right? So it's balls and strengths. But when I'm working with people, I normally start with the strengths.
Right.
So I have them take this Clifton Strengths Finder, It's like a 40-minute standardized test that they take, and it gives a feedback printout. These are the top 5 and top 10 things that you're really good at, and this is how you could be doing more of it, etc. And so we use that as the kickoff to the conversation about how much of this you're actually doing, how much can we be doing more of these things. Okay, great. So now we go to fears. And so fears, I also have them take a standardized test called an Enneagram, which is more of a personality test, but it also shows how fear shows up for you. So we end up having these conversations about essentially who would you be in the absence of these concerns. And if you now have the ability to lean in on your strengths and pull back on any head trash or anything else that's been holding you back, so you can be the Michael Jordan of whatever it is you want to do, what's that going to look like? What do we want to do? So now, third step, we reset goals based on this new world order, the new person that you are. And it's like, so now that we've identified the fears and the strengths, what do you want to do? Shoot for the moon too, and then let's build, steps in between. And then what's the mindset you're going to need on this? Because it's one thing to have these goals, one thing you've now had these things, but what about your mindset do we need to adapt and change? Because you're going to be with yourself all the time. If I'm working with you maybe once a week and I give you homework, these are the things that we need to really drive in so that they take root. And then lastly is habits. What's the actual things you need to be doing every day? Things first start in the head, but what are the habits? What are the things you need to do that sometimes you've been blowing off working out or not spending as much time with your family, or you're not doing this, or you need to really lean in on your marketing chops. You want to go get an MBA, but you're going to need to do it at night. So what are they going to need to be your habits so that we set you up for success, that this doesn't all come apart after theory meets reality. So that's how we end up doing it. I work with people over the course of, sometimes it's a 10-week thing, we do 2 weeks on each, and then do consistent kind of check-ins. Or companies will hire me to do this maybe a little bit more than 10 weeks, it ends up being maybe 20 or so with people, and then re-engage. So it's meant to actually set people up on a trajectory with framework, habits, ways that we're checking to make sure that you're staying on it, so that it's not just get you all excited and then you check in with them 2 months later and nothing's changed.
So what is the moment? What is out of those steps that most people get stuck at, or do they struggle with?
I think it's steps 4 and 5. They get excited on first 2 and 3 and set the goals, but then the mindset stuff can be hard to reprogram, the neural pathways that have built up over a while. So I work with people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and it depends upon how long this has been going here. It can be harder to change those things. So they oftentimes will get caught up on that. It's like old habits of thought patterns that get in their way. And then lastly, on habits, it can happen sometimes they want to do everything all at once. And I'm like, I'm not letting you, because if you try to do everything all at once, it's not going to stick. So what are the ones that we're going to do that give us the biggest bang for the buck, give them enough time to take root, and then we introduce the additional habits. So those last 2 are where people can really trip up, and that's where I end up having to come back and re-engage. So I keep them, accountable on this. When they also work through their companies, I make sure that, their bosses or others are also helpful to keep them accountable so they don't fall down.
So where can, this is a good moment, so we'll put it in the comments anyway, but this is a good moment to tell everyone, your website and where they can get this book.
Sure. So my name is very easy. It's Chris Woods with an S. And people used to always say when I was a kid, they used to thought it was a fake name. I'm like, that's my real name. So my name is Chris Woods, and I'm a coach. So my website is just chriswoodscoach.com. And there you see a link to the book, Balls and Brains. It's available on Amazon, as well as more details about how I work with people, including a lot of testimonials of people who've had, really great experiences. And then lastly, there's a way to message me right there. So chriswoodscoach.com.
Brilliant. Okay, so a little bit about redefining your success, because you've had success and you're obviously having a lot more now. So how do you define success now versus before?
So I feel like I'm the same person in all aspects of my life now. So whereas I was, putting on, a persona at work, and then I was a dad at home and a husband, and then all these other things. I'm now at this stage, I'm the same authentic person in all aspects of my life. And I'm using the things that are my strengths, my talents, the things that I've learned, the things that I'm committed to actually help other people so that they don't have to get to the point where they flatline at 40 years old to have, a reset. So I have looked this up. I was like, what it would have been great for somebody to show me this in my 20s or my 30s, right? And so let my experience benefit thousands, if not millions of people. So how do I do that? And I've now done that purposely, or starting with the book on balls and brains, is that the name gets people's attention and they're like, all right, I'll listen to what that is. And then I'm like, I'll keep it simple. It's 104 pages. It's these 2 most important things that you can do. If you're not happy with it, I'll give you your money back. So that's what gets me super passionate, is if I can now be helping more people and all over the world so that they're living an authentic, productive life, that's a gift.
So let's help the listeners then, on some just simple advice, and I understand, because what we get a lot about is burnout and people not knowing what to do next. So first of all, why do people wait for burnout or crisis to change, do you think?
So I think that can be human nature. It ends up happening with work. It happens psychologically. It happens with your body, that you don't listen to it until it finally puts up the red flag and said, you're doing this too much or this not enough. I think it's because our thought patterns dictate what we do. And then our ego wants to feel like we've got some control, quote unquote control. And what I did yesterday, I want to be able to do today, because change is scary. And if it doesn't really hit you right in the face, you're like, I guess I can live without it. It's kind of like high blood pressure. You don't even know you actually have high blood pressure until it actually is a reading, or God forbid you have something that happens to you.
So have you got any small advice, what you can, let me say, can you redesign your life before it breaks you? We know you can, but what small steps before it breaks you can we take to recognise first that we need to change that or want to, and what can we do?
So I'd start with that question that Peter Crone poses, and anybody can ask themselves it, and then write down their answers. Say, who would I be in the absence of my concerns? And write that down. And oftentimes what people will be like, is like, I would be a very much calmer person. I wouldn't be thinking about this. I would do this, or I wouldn't do this. And I love that because it opens up possibilities that a lot of times you wouldn't give yourself permission to do. And once you actually see that that's there and it's already in your head and it's in your heart, you're like, wow, okay, so that could be a bit of a beacon. And it shows me that I don't have to be like somebody else or necessarily any of these other ways. This is what I would feel like, and this is what I want to do. So I recommend for people to do that exercise and write it down and then look at it. And then maybe start seeing the gap to where you currently are. And as opposed to then trying to fix everything all at once, what's the biggest one? What would be the biggest thing that if you could change, you would do it? And let's take a stab and take a start at that. Because if that's going to give you, if that's 20% of what came out and it's going to give you 80% of your return, let's focus on that one to start. And it's such an empowering feeling because it's you. It's your own, lighthouse.
So let's get this right. You kind of answered this, but how do you know when you're living to your strengths? Because sometimes as you said, you've had a successful career, living in some respect to some of your weaknesses and still being successful. So how do you know when you're living to your strengths? Is it emotional? Is it health? What is it?
I'd say it's both emotional and health, and oftentimes, a lot of times people don't give themselves permission to audit it. So what I'd suggest, the best thing I think you can do is to take this Clifton Strength Finder. You don't have to do it through me. You can find it online or other ones like that. And do it and read it. And then have an honest conversation with yourself. These things that I'm really good at, does this resonate with me? And I find that it does with 98% of people. Like, oh yeah, that's actually me. And how much of that are you doing? Okay. And then even ask, when you feel energized at work or at other parts of your life, what is it that you're doing? So for example, for me, the things that I used to love to do were going out on client calls or coming up with a new kind of solution, marketing solution for a company based upon what they were doing. Not designing it engineer-wise or any of the data part of it. I was like, all right, so I've uncovered how this could really be impactful for somebody, and I want to make that happen. Or we haven't broken into this account yet. They don't know about us. I now have this as an ability that I can present to them and then see how this works, that it will benefit them as opposed to them just buying because they like it. So that was the things that used to get me excited and the things I was really good at. It would then be draining to me when my job evolved, that it was less doing that and more, say, managing people or having to come up with analysis and a lot of the things that really wasn't in my wheelhouse. It would make me kind of stressed. I'd spend 7 hours a day on it and I wasn't really enjoying it. So that ended up giving me the ability, was like, this is what's missing here. If I can design what I want to do, I want to play on the stuff that gets me energized and frankly, I'm really good at. So I probably wouldn't have gotten there if I didn't start asking those questions and start feeling, all right, I feel good when I do this and I don't feel good when I'm doing these other things.
Excellent. Well, I think what I normally do now, Chris, if you don't mind, is get straight into like a quick fire round, you know, a quick one answer, whatever, before we wrap up, just to see where you go. So the best advice you've ever received?
Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it.
Okay. Worst advice people still follow?
Keep going. That's the way it's always been done.
Okay. Fear or comfort? Which is the more dangerous?
I'd say comfort, and here's the reason why. Is if you're too comfortable, I think eventually it could get you to live a life that you regret.
One habit that changed your life?
Say it one more time.
One habit that changed your life?
Practicing gratitude.
And one belief people need to let go of?
Life has to be hard.
Okay. Does it have to be that hard? Yeah, well, you know, and is the grind ever worth it? I don't know. But yeah,
right.
I mean.
So if I answer the question correctly, a belief that people need to let go of is, I think, the assumption that life sucks and that's just the way it is, because it's not. It doesn't have to be that way.
No, it doesn't. No, you're right. Well, look, it's been fantastic. I mean, we've said where we can find you. We've put down where people can find you, and just while you're here, again, who is your book Balls and Brains really for, and how can and can people work with you? Can we get in touch and
Yeah, so I work with both men and women, but I wrote the book mostly for men in their early 20s into early 40s, meant to be an accessible way for them to realize that it's okay to recognize that you don't have all the answers and that you're operating on fear, as well as you've got it in you that you can have a great upward trajectory and you can have a great career and a great life. There's just a couple of things that I would start with that I wish someone had told me when I was in my 20s or 30s. And so this is what I'm sharing with others.
Brilliant. No, well, thanks very much, Chris, for coming on. And if something in this conversation has resonated with anyone out there, don't ignore it. That's usually where the work starts. And, get in touch through to Chris if you need that kind of support, and us if you want to get hold of Chris. But thanks very much for coming on, Chris. It's really been great speaking to you.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Hopefully that wasn't too painful.
Thanks so much for listening to Not Finished Yet. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Please see the links to all our socials. Until next time, remember, you're not finished yet.